All right. How's everybody doing? Stuffing your face with pizza, I see. All right. So thanks for coming out here to IndyPy and Indy Rub. Is that what that's? I'm sorry. This, again, is called Stronger Than Fear, Mental Health and Developer Community. And you might be wondering yourself, actually, one of the dudes, I met you, Clayton. Yeah, we met each other in Portland, Oregon. We live like an hour away from each other, but we actually met in Portland one time. So you might be thinking, who is this person who's talking to you? Well, I live up in West Lafayette, Indiana. I've lived there about, well, you know Indiana, West Lafayette. I'm used to talking to people who are like, Indiana, really? Huh? I've been there about 15 years. I've been a web dev for about 20 years, mostly PHP and JavaScript, some Python, DevOps, design, crap like that, whatever. I used to be a designer until the expectations of the internet far surpassed my abilities. I've been a team lead, I've been a lone wolf, I've been a CTO most recently, stuff like that, and I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a local community participant. I have served on school boards and other ridiculous homey junk like that. I have been called a webmaster. I would like you to raise your hand if you've been called a webmaster ever in your life, okay? About 6 people here are very old, not including me. And since 2012, I've been doing something called open sourcing mental illness, and so what does that mean? What does that mean? But I've been speaking openly about mental illness and mental health issues in the tech community since 2012. I founded, I'm the chairman of the board of OSMI, Open Sourcing Mental Illness, a nonprofit 501c3 formed here in Indiana. I don't know what that means. I'm not really that excited about it, but that's what it is. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, or any kind of, I guess I'm an expert, sure. It says here, not any kind of expert. I'm kind of an expert in some things. I don't know how useful they are, but I am certified in mental health first aid. That's something I've taken, course. But I'm here to talk about what it's like to have a mental illness, or a couple diagnoses that I have. And from my perspective, as just a person who's been a developer for a long time, has been doing web development for quite a while, and to talk about how mental health affects our community and our industry. And so that's something I've had a few years to kind of think about and talk about. So this is the uncomfortable audience participation section, so you're going to want to kind of warm up here. I'm going to give you a little beat. I'm going to want you to clap for me. Just everybody, yeah, I know it's going to be stupid. You got to clap. Put your beers down. Come on. All right, let's go. Everybody clap. Yeah, it feels good, right? Right? Mm-hmm. Yep. There's no reason for that. There was no reason to do that. It wasn't necessary. There's no point. There was not. Sometimes I do that just to see if I can make people do it, and it works every time. So I'm curious about, this is the actual participation. Look at this weird thing whose is this? It looks like some kind of like GoBot. Not a transformer like the good ones, but it kind of looks like a GoBot. The cheap transformers that you'd get if you were that kid. I was kind of like that kid. So I'm very familiar with GoBots. Everybody here is too young to know what the hell I'm talking about. So, okay. So I'm curious, how many of you have to wear glasses? Most of the people here, it seems like. And those of you who didn't raise your hands, the slow churn towards death has not yet struck you. But it is inevitable. This is a very common thing. But in some ways, it's not considered a disability because so many people do it, but it is a degradation of the performance of your body, and you have to have some kind of ocular crutch, maybe we'd say, to cope with that. Now, I'm curious, how many of you would feel comfortable discussing the fact that you wear glasses or contacts or some other artificial lens on your eyeballs in your place of work? Please raise your hand if you would feel okay with that. So most of you. Now, some of you who don't want to raise your hands, or you really have a terrible workplace, I'm very sorry about that. But, so yeah, now I'm going to ask you a couple other questions. Has anyone ever asked you, please raise your hands if they have, has anyone ever said, hey, so, I know wear these glasses, but have you ever just like tried squinting instead? Has anyone ever done that? Anyone? Okay. How about just suggest that maybe you try harder to see? Has anyone ever suggested? Nobody? Really? Okay, all right. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so glasses, that's a very common thing. Everybody deals with that. Lots of people deal with it. Most people's lives have been touched by glasses. But let's talk about something a little more morbid, literally. Diabetes, which is something that 3 of my siblings have developed type 2 diabetes, so I'm pretty screwed, I think. And so genetically, I'm not in good shape. And it's a pretty common thing that a lot of people deal with. And if it's not treated correctly, it can shorten your life dramatically or kill you right away with complications and things like that. Now, I'm curious. I'm going to ask the same question about diabetes that I asked before. Not the thing is like, have you tried harder to not have diabetes? Because that is so utterly stupid that no one would suggest that. However, what they might suggest is this. Would you feel comfortable discussing, say, diabetes in a workplace? Again, maybe not your most favorite subject, but if it came up, I want you to raise your hand if you'd be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. That's fine. Please raise your hand if you would be. Okay. Now, some of you aren't, and that's all right. That's no problem with that. All right, so we talked about diabetes. I want to talk about cancer now. Cancer is something a lot of people have dealt with. A lot of people have dealt with. Unfortunately, my brother passed away from cancer a couple of years ago on his 3rd go-round with it. And I think most people in this room have either known someone who has passed away from it or have dealt with it themselves or family members or friends or things like that. It's widespread. It touches lots and lots of people. And we have months dedicated to certain kinds of cancer. I probably shouldn't pick my nose with this. Well, this isn't mine. I'll just do that myself then. Sorry. And we talk about cancer in those kinds of ways. We talk about it pretty openly. And I'm curious, it's something that, say 50 years ago, we wouldn't have talked about it like that at all. We wouldn't have discussed it like that at all. We wouldn't talk about it openly. But I'm curious, I'm going to ask that same question of you that I asked before about diabetes and I asked about glasses. Would you feel okay talking about it in your workplace? Would you feel okay? Again, not your favorite subject, but I'd like you to raise your hand if it seems like, yeah, I'd be okay with that. Maybe you don't come in after the weekend saying, so I had a killer weekend, we went to a game, it was really awesome, and cancer. That might not be how you leave. Now, okay, so that's all fine. We talk about this stuff. And again, a lot of these things we talk about are very widespread. We talk about these kinds of things. They get brought up in when we discuss wellness issues, when we discuss, what are the kinds of things that we deal with commonly. So I want to ask, would you feel comfortable talking about mental illness in your workplace? How many of you would? So far fewer it seems like. And the hands don't shoot up nearly as urgently as most of us. Those that you do, I think that's awesome, but that bears my experience out too. At least from what I've seen is that it's far, far less common that people are okay with that. And I want you to think about that as we're discussing some of this stuff and think about what kind of impact maybe that has on things. And we'll look into that in a minute, but back to me, my subject I'm most interested in. I have 2 different kinds of things. I have something called generalized anxiety disorder. I don't actually have 2 things. This is kind of a misnomer. It's not like I have a cold and I have stomach flu, like 2 separate things. It's just my brain works a certain way and it gets diagnosed into 2 different things, and the way we understand it maybe isn't really all that clear. But anyways, I have 2 different diagnoses that I have that are mental health related. The first one is generalized anxiety disorder. So what does that mean? That basically means I have a fight or flight reaction when it's not appropriate to have a fight or flight reaction. Now, if suddenly like a lion burst through that door somehow, and I would know that I would either have to roundhouse kick that lion to subdue it quickly to keep myself from being harmed or others. I would protect all of you, of course. Or I would run as fast as I could out that door because that's where my car is, and I would drive away quickly. Neither of those things is actually going to happen. I'm going to get eaten. But the fact of the matter is that is a response that is appropriate. I have an existential threat that has burst through this door of this co-working space, whatever you guys call it, that I am terrified of, and I need to either punch my way out of this like Bruce Lee, or I need to run really, really fast, like some person who's very fast. So I need to do those things. That is an appropriate time to have an anxiety response like that, have a stress response like that. Your body is designed to protect itself. Your brain tries to protect itself, and it kicks your body into a state that has different kinds of hormones and different kinds of chemicals and stuff, cortisol and junk like that, pumps it through your bloodstream, does all this stuff to change the way that your body chemistry works so that you can do certain things. And you're supposed to be able to, that's only supposed to happen in times when you're actually threatened. The problem is that I have those reactions at times where it's not appropriate. So I might have that reaction when I'm like walking up to a bar that I've never been to, and I know there's friends of mine inside that I'm going to meet, but it's really busy, and I've never been in there before, and I'm not exactly sure where they are, and I'll stand outside there for like 10 minutes and then just decide to go home. I'll just go back in my car and drive home because I am way too freaked out about that. If I feel like I walk in that door, everybody's staring at me, I'm deeply uncomfortable, don't like this. I don't like those kinds of situations. I don't like situations where I feel like I don't understand the rules, right? And if I don't understand the rules, something potentially, I feel like my brain has gotten to the point where it sort of feels like something's going to go wrong in those kinds of situations. So another way is like I'm really uncomfortable with most public transportation systems because I don't know if you've ever examined the onboarding process for like how to come to a new city and learn how to use the bus. It's not that great. It's really pretty poor. And they don't explain stuff to you, and I just feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Do I give the bus driver a 20? Do I let him keep the change? I don't understand. And I kind of get it, I guess, and if I'm with a buddy, a person who sort of has my back, even if they don't really understand it either, I feel okay. But it's that feeling of being alone and not understanding what the rules are is really, really, really scary for me. And that's a big part of my generalized anxiety disorder, is I get really freaked out about stuff like that. And I also have something called ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there's a couple actually sort of variants on it. So there's some traditional things that most people think of when they think of ADHD. And I have a couple of those things that behaviors that sort of are consistent with that. I have a lot of trouble focusing, staying focused on a particular task sometimes. Sometimes it feels like my brain is in a state where it just cannot stay on purpose, on target. It like keeps switching over and over. The context keeps switching and I can't ever stay focused on it. And I'm also really, really apt to avoid unappealing tasks. And when I say unappealing, like just something I'm not very interested in. If I'm very interested in, I can focus very strongly on it, and I will do that. And I will do that thing to the exclusion of everything else that I should be doing, right? And I will avoid things like I've avoided paying bills that got my water shut off, not because I didn't have the money for it, just because I just was like, never got around to it. Because I'd look at it and be like, I really don't want to do that right now. So I just didn't pay the bill. I mean, this is silly. Why? So, I mean, it's a matter of when does it become a disorder? Well, it becomes that when it's like somehow sort of destructive in your life, right? It's non-productive and it's harmful. But there's a couple other things that with ADHD that come with it, at least in my experience and the experience of a number of people that comes along with the sort of variant that I guess that maybe I have, is that I have a really low frustration threshold. So like most people, they don't get as pissed off as quickly as I do. And they don't get as frustrated when things don't go kind of right, or if like circumstances don't sort of add up the way they need. And so I get frustrated quickly, and that ties in really closely with this other aspect, which is really common with people with ADHD, is that their emotions will be much more intense than average. So people who have those conditions oftentimes will find that if they get frustrated quickly, and they get very frustrated very fast. or they get very scared very fast. And usually fear often shows up as two things. One, sort of just like terror, freak out, or it becomes like utter sadness and dismay. But the other side, the way that it shows is in anger. Fear, anger is for most part a response to fear. Mostly it's your brain and your body trying to protect itself. So that's why it goes about in that way. And so you take this stuff and you take this intensity of emotion and this tendency to get frustrated and this tendency to hyperfocus and all those things, and then you combine all that together with this anxiety disorder, which is really common, like in 35% of people with ADHD. I think I saw a number. I saw a number once. Yeah, quote me on that. But there's a fairly high, what they call a comorbidity rate. That's when you have two things. It sounds a lot worse than it is. It just means you have two things. But I'm really, really good at constructing bad outcomes and hyper-focusing on them. So let's say, sorry, my shoelace is untied and it's really bothering me. No, it wasn't even untied. It was just so long that I kept stepping on it and it was annoying the shit out of me. So I'm really good at constructing these bad outcomes. And it's not. I mean, some people in very stressful situations, it gets harder, and it gets harder for people. And sort of like if you talk about neurologically normal people, they will have stress responses, and they will have anxiety responses, and they will sometimes not want to do things that they don't feel like doing and stuff like that. But for me, it happens way, way, way more often, so that I'll construct those bad outcomes because I'm good at taking things and pattern matching and finding connections between stuff really quickly. So I will quickly find the thing between, oh, I forgot to pay this bill, to I will be homeless and everyone I love will die. And I will connect those 20 unrelated steps, and then I will go through the next several days assuming that this outcome is inevitable, and the fates have deemed it so. And I've absolutely had that happen to me. I've been convinced to myself that oh, my boss is horribly mad at me and I'm going to be fired and there's nothing I can do about it. And based on a thing that was like, hey, on Monday, just stop in. And then I get there on Monday after I've spent the last 3 days hyperventilating over the weekend. And I've not hyperventilating, but actually what happens with me is my chest gets really, really tight, feels like a knot, right under my sternum, which really is not fun. And sometimes I'll feel kind of sick to my stomach and things like that. And I'll get in there and I'll be all sweaty and stuff and be like, okay. And it just is like, hey, but was that project going okay? It's like, oh yeah, I finished that up. And it turns out everything was perfectly fine. And I spent the entire weekend assuming the absolute worst was possible. Now, occasionally the absolute worst happens, and then, of course, you've confirmed that, and your whole brain is like telling, I told you so, goddamn. But, normally most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time, bad things don't really happen, and the worst things don't happen, but you worry about this a lot. So I take medication. I take 5 or 6 different meds every day. That's kind of a lot. But I've been doing it for 25 years, and that has been figured out. I have chronic conditions, and we have adjusted to take into account different things, and it has worked out that that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not excited about the fact that I take that many medications, but I also know that if I don't take those things, generally my life will be a lot worse. I will feel crappy, I will act crappy, I will be unproductive, unhappy, and generally not a great person to be around, and not a person who really wants to be around at all. So that is just not fun, and not good, and not healthy. So I keep taking my medication. And I see a therapist every week. But it varies. I've gone down to 2 weeks and stuff, but it's a little bit of a stressful time because I'm switching jobs and a bunch of other things are happening in my life. So this has been a little bit stressful. So with this therapist, I talk about the things that I do and why I do the things that I do, and we try to figure out sort of techniques and ways that are helpful for changing my reactions to things. Basically changing, particularly for me, how do I process things like either outside stimuli or my environment or things like that? And then also, how do I change things like thoughts that pop up into my head, like, what if everybody I loved left me? Or what if my kid died? Or what if, all these horrible, horrible things that you can imagine, they'll pop into your head. Sometimes people have these things like really, really problematically. They call it unwanted thoughts. And that's a pretty common, not super, super common, but it's not uncommon. A lot of people have that. And I work on that, and I come up with strategies to address that. And she is just good at this and helps me get through this stuff. But the thing is that it impacts my work every single day. There isn't a day that goes by where I, as a developer, I, as a person who's been working in this industry for about 20 years, doesn't have to deal with this. I do every single day. And there's some days and sometimes it absolutely gives me superpowers. There are parts of my job that I am absolutely good at and better at than a lot of people because my brain works the way that it does. It absolutely is definitely the case. I know it to be true. I know it is the case that because I can make, human beings' brains are really good pattern matching machines, and I have a really, really good pattern matching machine, and I'm really good at taking disparate stuff what I found is that a lot of people don't make certain connections as quickly as I do between different things, and I'm kind of good at that, and my brain has gotten really good at that. I'm just naturally good at that. And that means that I can do stuff that, when we sort of, you put it in quotes, full stack developer. Yeah. Well, I'm actually kind of good at that because, well, first off, I was a webmaster, so obviously I'm good at all of it. And then secondly, but there are people who are good at that stuff because they are able to see how does this aspect of a system that I'm creating, which is maybe goes from data store to data engine to application layer to front-end stuff, which may be on the server or may be in the client, and then how we present that stuff, and then design work and interface UX stuff and things like that. So it's like a big cake that's got 5 layers, and now there's people who just I just make this part of the icing, and that's what they do. And it's awesome because they're usually really, really good at that part of the icing, right? Okay? But I'm pretty good at figuring out that if we store our data this way, that means that we're going to have to do this up here at this part. Or how that means that we're going to have to present things to the user this way, or it's going to make it a pain for us. We're going to have to do more work to present it to the user in a particular way. One of the things I'm good at is empathizing with users. I find it really interesting the way that people operate and act and the things that they do and stuff like that, and why do they do the things they do, and I find that interesting. And so I'm good at empathizing with users for somebody who spends basically no time and training on it whatsoever. I'm pretty good at that, and I'm good at thinking about if we make this technology choice, that's going to impact our users in such a way. And I think that's particularly useful when you think about the fact that all the stuff that we're doing, we're building for somebody else, for the most part. There are a few things that I've done for myself in my day. I mean, scripts that I've written purely for myself, and that's what's fine. But for the most part, what we're doing is we're making things possible that weren't possible for somebody before, or we're making things easier for somebody or are able to do on a scale that they weren't able to do before. So some people, who was that guy who worked on the Obama campaign, whatever that guy. He called technology as a force multiplier. And, effectively that's sort of what it is, and we build force multiplying tools for people who can't build them for themselves. And at the end of the day, we're building these things for users, not for ourselves. So that's particularly useful. But there's sometimes, the way that my brain, it absolutely ruins me. Sometimes it craters my day. Sometimes it renders me unproductive. Sometimes something will emotionally hit me and it will just knock me for a loop. And I can't get stuff done. Sometimes the way that my brain is working is it will not allow me to focus on doing a task that I need to get done. And I will just, it's like instead of doing this task here, I will just spin around like a butterfly with this busted wing, like in a circle, I don't know, like a crappy single-engine plane, just like this. And that was a good sound effect, wasn't it? sometimes it just ruins everything. It ruins everything. And the most difficult part of that, the most challenging part of that, is how alone that it makes you feel. And I've been to a lot of tech conferences, like 50 or 60 or something like that. And I've felt utterly alone in crowds of thousands of people. And I have at times felt completely incapable of living the life that I am in. That I've been put here, but there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I cannot cope in society, and that ultimately it would be better if I just gave up. And I felt like I've always screwed things up, and I always fail, and that everyone will grow tired of me and leave. And I felt like I'm sitting there, and I'm watching all these other people who seem to be able to get by in life and cope and do the things that they're supposed to do, and I can't do that, and what's wrong with me? Why is everyone else okay and I'm not? And I felt that way a lot for most of my life, honestly. But the fact is that there's actually a lot of people who feel like this. There's a lot of people. And so with open sourcing mental illness, that's what we're fighting. We're trying to help those people, particularly in the tech community. But first, I want to talk about the worldwide community. I want to talk about how this impacts us on a worldwide scale. So if we look at something, a health organization, the World Health Organization, and there was a study that was released in 2008. I don't think they've released a new one since then, called The Global Burden of Disease. And it's a big, long document that you can read, and you can read all sorts about the impact of different diseases on different populations, and they have a metric in it called disease burden. And this disease burden is basically a metric which they use to measure the impact of a disease or category of diseases on a population, okay? So what they found was that the burden of mental disorders is the largest of all disorder categories in North America, greater than cardiovascular disease and greater than cancer. And a quote from that study, in all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. 1/3 of years lost to disability for neuropsychiatric disorders. That is an enormous percentage and indicates that category, how impactful that category is on the general health of populations in the entire world. So if we look at the tech community, what I found in doing research that I've done is that there's basically no research on the tech community. There's very, very little. I've seen a couple small social science studies with small populations to try to examine things. I've seen a couple studies done. I've seen more work done on tech entrepreneurs than developers, for one reason or another. So basically no research as far as we could find. So we do that research because it isn't being done. So in 2016, we did the second of our mental health and tech surveys. We did one in 2014, and then we did one in 2016. Now, the data that I'm going to show you here is only from people in the United States, and it's only people who are not self-employed. And the reason why is because, first, in the US, the way that the medical system works is different than many other countries. And that's the way that is. It's not different than every country, it's just different than it is in many other countries because of the way our insurance system works and all that kind of stuff. And then also non-self-employed, because in the United States, the workplace is the primary conduit for healthcare. And so you have different sort of needs and ways that you access resources as a self-employed person than you do as a non-self-employed person. So to sort of ease this out a little bit, we're looking at just one section. Now, this is still over 800 respondents in about a 1,500 respondent survey that we had. So we asked, there's 4 questions that I want you to look at that I think are important, and I'll show you some data from here. The first one is, do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? And for just a second, think to yourself, do I think that there would be negative consequences for that? For, say, a physical health issue. And in that case, only 72% of people, 72% of people said no, only 25% said maybe, only 4% said yes, there would be a negative consequence for discussing a physical health issue. And if we think about how we raised our hands, maybe that plays out, maybe that bears out pretty well. If we look at mental health issues, 23% of people said yes, definitely. 41% said maybe. Only 36% said no. So 5 times more, actually more than 5, think there is definitely would be negative consequences for discussing a mental health issue. A second question, would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? I think that's an interesting question to ask. I get asked that question a lot, like how do I deal with these things in an interview? I know that I have mental health issues. How do I evaluate if an employer is going to be supportive of me? And I think that's something, especially people who are maybe looking at hiring or looking to be hired, those are considerations that I guarantee you some of you are thinking about. Because if we look at the numbers, which we'll look in a minute, some folks are. So would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? Physical? Only 24% people said yes, and that's not surprising. Most people don't want to tank their job interview by saying, like, I don't know, I poop a lot, or something like that, right? They probably don't want to bring that up, right? Maybe is 40%, no is 36%. But let's look at mental health issues. Only 7% said yes. 26% said maybe. 68%, about twice as many, said no. That's a pretty stark difference. Yes, under the Americans with Disability Act, if you have more than 15 employees, it is illegal for you to discriminate against an employee based on a health condition that you can make a reasonable accommodation for. A reasonable accommodation is intentionally vague, but that includes mental health issues. So yes, it is illegal to discriminate against someone for a mental health issue that you can accommodate for. No, it is not easy to prove that. So most people don't bring it up. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? Remember, we talked about, as I mentioned before, the workplace is the primary conduit for healthcare in the United States. And secondly, the workplace has a direct interest in the health of its employees. We'll get to that in a minute, but it has a direct interest in it. So does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? Only 30% of people said yes. 37 and 33, no and don't know. So 70% said no or I don't know. So it's either ineffective or absent. 70%. So a fourth question, do you feel that being identified as a person with a mental health issue would hurt your career? 87% of people said yes or maybe. Only 2% said no, it has not. And then before I show you this, keep in mind that this is a self-selecting survey. We did not lock 500 developers in a room and take a random sample of them, Star Trek transport them out into a black box and then force them to take this test. Or not a test, fill this survey out. But this is self-selective. So there's going to be what you call a self-selection bias in it. But there's one of the questions we asked was, have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition? Now, a related number to give you an idea would be, in the general population, most of the numbers that you see that are quoted are that about 20% of the general population at any given time is dealing with a mental health disorder that would be diagnosable. That doesn't mean they have been diagnosed. It means that we estimate that there are 20% of the population. That is of the general population, 1 in 5 people, which is a very, very high number. A very high number. Now, this is a slightly different question, but I still think it's pertinent. Have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition? And these are the numbers that we got back from that population set who answered this was 50%. That is very high. I think it is probably high in part because of self-selection bias. I also think it is probably indicative that even if you account for that, it is indicative that probably mental health issues are more prevalent in this population than they are in the general population. And regardless, even if you're talking about, it's only 20% of the people who are IT professionals, sick workers don't work or they're significantly less productive. So it is absolutely in the interest of organizations to think about this. It doesn't matter what they're sick with. It absolutely is just the case that if they're not feeling well, they're not as productive. That's just a fact. So if you ask what the upside is, like why try to make a change in the workplace, why try to make adjustments to that, it's because it benefits the organization and it benefits everybody in it. Not just that population, but the entire organization. Because mental wellness means better employees. Employees who feel valued and secure work more effectively when employers demonstrate a commitment to their well-being. And companies that demonstrate this want to be worked with. They want to be people who, there's tons of talented people out here. This is a market where we have way more jobs than we do people who are good at it. That's why we have things like the Iron Yard and stuff to quickly train people on how to get up to speed. If this was most other markets, you would not have that situation. But it is the case that lots of people want to learn this because there's enormous demand for skilled labor in this area. So there's lots of competition. More people want to work for someplace that respects them fully, that doesn't ignore their well-being. And whether by just not acting on it, or whether intentionally, if you don't make an active decision to pay attention to it, you are ignoring it as an employer. My friend Greg Bogus, who works over at Twilio, we were having a conversation about this a couple weeks ago. And he said, we talk about 10x developers as like that's a fairy tale, but if you take a developer with crippling depression and you get them the right treatment, they will literally be 10 times more productive. All you had to do was help them get the right treatment. You didn't have to go hire that person. You didn't have to let go of somebody and then train somebody else and hope that they were that level. There are people in your organization right now, even if we just look at the general population numbers, there are people in your organization right now who I guarantee you are dealing with this, and they don't want to tell you because they're afraid. They're afraid because they're afraid of what people will do if they say something about it. All of our numbers back this up. But change is really hard. Change is hard because it's scary. Because we don't want to screw stuff up and we don't know what to do. We might be afraid of endangering our workplace. Those of us who are team leads, those of us who are, say, C-level executives, those of us who work in HR, we're scared of screwing things up and making it bad for everybody if we make the wrong move. And those of us maybe who aren't team leads, we're just scared of losing our jobs. We have to have a job. We have to make money. That's the way this whole society works. We have to. So there's a lot of things that we do at OSMI. There's talks and there's these forums we have. There's stories that we share. There's handbooks that we've written specifically for employers and employees, for C-level executives and HR teams and employees to understand their rights, the regulations, and to understand how to implement policies that will create a workplace supportive of mental wellness. That's what we do. But I'm going to give you 3 things you can do right now. The first thing is get those handbooks because they're free. We give them away for free. They're Creative Commons licensed. Now, you can pay us a little money for it. It's nice because it helps us keep doing it. But you can also pay us 0 money for it. There are handbooks for employers and employees. Specifically, there are 2 about how to navigate the Americans with Disability Act, 1 for employers, 1 for employees. And then a 3rd one, how to create supportive workplaces to promote mental wellness. We have this stuff available. This is out there. We created it because it didn't exist in this industry. So you can go get it right now. There's really no excuse. And you can do this work. The second thing is to make a decision to speak openly about mental health. And that does not mean that you go up here like I do and sort of overshare. My therapist says that I have a confessional personality, and I think that's quite accurate. But talking about the subject of mental health, making a decision to talk about it the same way that we're comfortable with talking about breast cancer in this society, or talking about diabetes in this society, or talking about heart disease in this society. We have to make a decision to do that and speak about it openly and actively. Each one of you has a great deal of influence on the social groups and communities you participate in. You might think that, oh, you're just kind of one of the folks that sits at the back of the wall, kind of sit in the corner. People pay attention to you. People take their cues from each other. We are social animals. And those of us who make a decision to, say, speak openly about mental health, we are actively stating that it's not something to be afraid of. And people listen to that. You can have an enormous impact on the world around you, which are the people who interact with you, who respect you, your colleagues, your coworkers, your friends, your family. You can have an enormous influence on them. And I guarantee you, a significant percentage of them are dealing with mental health issues and are scared to tell you right now. It is not an if, it is not a maybe. It is the case that it is that. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And in knowing that, the third thing, tell people that they matter. Because so many people who deal with these conditions feel like they don't, or they feel like they shouldn't. Again, we are social animals, and we need to hear how we impact each other's lives positively, how strong and how great we each are, that we push through challenges, the challenges of, I don't know, like being an adult, having somebody not take care of you all the time. That scares the crap out of me. I do not know how. I'm almost 42 years old. How did I get this far? I do not know. I don't know, because I still behave like a jackass most of the time. I'm not that different from a 9-year-old kid that I was back then. But everybody needs to hear that. Everybody needs to hear that. But the people who especially need to hear it are people whose brains lie to them. And my brain lies to me every day. Every single day. So I want to bring this back down sort of like to the essence of this stuff about what matters. And there's numbers and there's graphs and fun pie charts that fly around and shit like that. But I want to bring this back down sort of to the essence of what we're talking about and why these things matter. Communities are about people. They're not about code. The communities that we participate in, code is kind of a MacGuffin. Does anybody here know what a MacGuffin is? Okay, some of us know what a MacGuffin is. A MacGuffin is a plot device in a story that is the motivation, but it doesn't actually matter really what it is. It's like the Maltese Falcon, if you ever heard of that movie. It's like the thing that everybody's excited about, but does it really matter? Is it actually that important? Is it part of the story? No, it's just something that everybody's excited about. It's the thing that brings everybody together, but it's not the story. The story is the people. The story being written by communities is written by the people and how they interact with one another and how they care for one another and how they help one another. And this is about our community and our colleagues and our friends. This is about our people. And a lot of them suffer in silence. A lot of them suffer in silence. And some of them disappear. Some of them we lose. We've lost friends. I've had volunteers recently lose friends who've taken their own life. We're left to wonder and regret and try to understand. And there's some people we can save, and there's some that we can't. But only fear allows this. The only reason we allow so many people to suffer in silence is fear. And the only reason we don't save more of our kin and our kith is fear. That is the only reason. So we have to choose. We choose. You choose, and I choose, and we all choose every single day. We can choose to give in to fear. We can choose to hide. It's easy to hide. And it's easy to be silent, and it's easy to be quiet. It's real easy. Doing this and making these decisions is not for the weak or the indifferent or those content to be comfortable. But I don't think we need to be like that. I think we can choose differently. We can choose to meet inaction with action, and we can choose to meet confusion with understanding, and we can choose to meet indifference with compassion. If we choose to be stronger than fear. Thank you. I'm going to tell you one more thing. They're going to come up there. They got one of these. They got a guy in a clown suit who's going to pull me off like the Apollo. But I made a decision and I made a choice, and I hope that it's something that you'll help me with. That I have been CTO for a pretty decent period of time. Been working at a tech startup, and I made a decision last week that I'm going to take a leap. And I'm stepping down from my CTO role, and I'm going to do this OSMI, open sourcing mental illness. I'm going to do that full time. So on May 21st, I'm going to start that full time. Now I'm going to have to do consulting to fill in because, shockingly, nonprofits don't pay at all. But it's something that I'm choosing to do because this is by far the most rewarding work I've ever done in my life. I've been doing web development for 20 years. I have done lots and lots of different stuff. This is by far what I think I should be doing. And I hope that you'll help me do that. I hope that you'll think about it. I hope that you'll look up osmihelp.org. I hope that you'll consider maybe donating or talking to your organization about becoming a partner with us. And that's me. So thanks very much. I appreciate it.
I really want to thank. Don't take that off yet. I've got questions, and I'm sure there are other people in the room who've got questions as well. At least I'm going to ask mine first. So,
all right, you're allowed to ask questions.
All right. As an employer in the tech community here in Indianapolis, the stat you put up there from Twilio's person about
Greg Bogus, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. As an employer, how do I approach asking an employee what would be the right way to help them seek help?
Probably what you need to do, in fact, not probably, what you need to do is to educate yourself about the most effective ways to help most people. I would strongly recommend that the first step you take is that you take a mental health first aid course. It is an 8-hour course that can be spread over a couple days or a single day. It cost me individually $50 to take it from the Mental Health America of Tippecanoe County, that's up in Lafayette. It is absolutely full of information that will help you interact with people who are in a mental health crisis, or even if they're not, it helps you enormously in being able to listen empathetically and guide people towards getting the help that they need. What it doesn't help you do and discourages you from doing is what so many developer types want to do, which is to fix their problems for them. That is probably the worst thing you can do because unless any of you are also medical professionals or say are licensed therapists or psychiatrists or psychologists, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. I would not like you to do surgery on me, and I would not like you to suggest how I'm going to fix my brain problem either. Because most of the time, unfortunately, we end up doing more harm than good. So there are, the extent of how do you create a culture of mental wellness, that's how we partner with employers, and we help them do that. But a basic first step is educate yourself by taking mental health first aid and then arming yourself with the local resources available so that you have something to tell people and stuff that you can say, here are some places that can help when you do encounter that. So that's what I'd suggest.
Excellent. Who else has questions? I'd love you guys to come up to the microphone. and ask your question here so we can get it on the recording.
Only those who will stand will ask. There you go. Hey! Oh, God, that's not good.
I better stand back
Come over here.
Sorry.
Watch the speaker. There we go.
Do you think people who are self-employed have less mental problems?
No.
All right, that was easy.
No. I'm becoming self-employed, so in my survey of one, I would say no. Problems is always a hard thing to say. I'd like to be careful and call it diagnosable mental health conditions, because you can get into a debate on is it a problem or not, or is it helpful? Sometimes maybe it is helpful, sometimes it's not helpful. Most of the time, if it's a disorder, there's generally not helpful, or generally it causes problems in your life. This is anecdotal, but I think it's probably the case that there are fewer, how would I say, neurotypical people who are self-employed, because it is a hard thing to do. Most people don't do it. And if you observe the behavior, if most people are doing a thing, that is probably typical. So I'd probably say no. Well, for the most part, I don't think so. I think that it's probably, I would guess that the percentages are slightly higher, but that doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. It just means that that's the way it is. Yeah.
So you had the 2016 survey. Are you going to be doing one for 2017? And
Yep.
Where's that going to be at?
If you go to osmihelp.org, that is where you're going to find everything. And what I really encourage is you sign up for our mailing list. The mailing list is we're going to send stuff out about all that stuff, and when those kinds of things are available. So you get on the mailing list, you're going to be able to find out about that stuff. Yes, we also post it to Twitter and Facebook and junk like that. And LinkedIn, I know everybody loves it. I'm a big fan. But, little nerd humor. LinkedIn also, yes. So we'll post stuff there, but I think the mailing list would really be good. Also because that's an effective way for us to fundraise, so please sign up for it.
If you've got a question, come on up. I'd love to get anybody else who's got something they'd like to ask Ed.
Yeah.
All right, Cameron.
What's up, buddy?
What's happening, boss?
How you doing?
I'm gonna ask the obvious question here. So you have
No, it's just fucking-
Sorry.
it's fucking-
Thank you, everyone.
All right, man.
So you
I'm
said
sorry.
that you've got a diagnosable mental illness.
I got two, man.
Or
Comorbidity.
two.
It's
I
awesome.
apologize. I'm bad at counting.
Yeah.
How did you ascertain that? Like, at what point in your life did you say, I actually need to go figure this out? Like,
when I started having a lot of problems emotionally when I was in junior high. I got bullied a lot in junior high. I didn't handle it well because I was being bullied. and I became depressed and anxious. Those were very evident. And so the school recommended that I see a therapist. The school was not particularly helpful, but that part was actually on target. So that was how I got sort of handling things like depression and anxiety. I have what I would call episodic depression. So I can get very depressed, but I'm not chronically depressed typically. It's usually based on something that's going on in my life or something that happens. Sometimes the anxiety spirals into the depression. But the other thing that might be more relevant to the adults here is that I was not diagnosed with ADHD until I was 27. So I went through my entire school process having undiagnosed ADHD, and then I went and talked to my therapist and at the time, and they said, hey, well, look at this, let's do an assessment. And oh, yes, you obviously have ADHD. Very, very, very obviously. And oh, hey, that explains every single problem I ever had in school, academically. That explained kind of everything. And that was, but, you know, I think relevant to that is something I'd add in, which is that if my knee kind of hurts and it kind of keeps hurting for a while, I'd say maybe I'll talk to the doctor about that because my knee keeps hurting and it won't stop hurting. If I'm having, the problem is because we're not willing to discuss it openly and because we're afraid of how we're going to be judged by it, we are not aware of, and we also feel that it's not really okay to just say, maybe I should talk to somebody if I'm kind of having some problems like this. Like, maybe I do have some issues with anxiety or depression. Maybe I don't, but there's nothing wrong with getting an assessment done. Just like there's nothing wrong with like, oh yeah, we'll run some tests to make sure, oh no, it turns out your knee's just kind of, I don't know, you're old, you suck, gonna die soon, here's some pills, right? And maybe that's it, and maybe something else is going on, and that's just the way it is. But the perceptions that we have, in the absence of positive reinforcement that it's okay, our default position in our culture is that it's not okay to talk about mental health. So in the absence of reinforcement that it is okay, we fall back to a position that it's not. And in that, I don't know of any major health crises or problems in society that have been dealt with by not talking about it and not being open about it and not saying that, oh, it's actually not something we should be ashamed of. I know a lot of major health problems that have been made far, far worse by shame and by morality and by our fear of the consequences of people finding out about it. But I don't know one that's gone well. So, yeah.
All right, do we have any more questions? Oh, I got one more for you. We'll take one last
Sure.
question.
And if anyone wants to talk after, I'm going to be here, so it's totally cool if you just want to talk to me afterwards. Yep.
So Ed, I have a question.
Yeah.
Kind of dovetails in it.
There's nothing wrong with this.
Essentially, I'm curious how it seemed like you're slightly maybe introverted a little bit, and how you ended up in this position, telling your mental health issues to other people, and embracing the fear, and how maybe you could help the rest of the, what suggestions do you have for the rest of the community that may be in the same place to help them get out there and talk more with their friends that they know are having issues?
Yeah. So the first things that I'd say about that is, why am I in the position that I am when I'm actually kind of have anxiety issues, things like that? It's because I'm also simultaneously a ham and like to show off. That's why. So that's just...
I hear you have a podcast.
I do have a podcast. It's called Development Hell. And I do it with a guy named Chris Hartjes, who's also known as Grumpy Programmer. And he writes Python now, so I guess he's okay to talk about in here. He works now for Mozilla in their QA, doing testing stuff for them. But yeah, it's called Development Hell or /dev/hell. So Dev Hell is the other thing it's called. So I like talking about myself, and I like showing off. And I kind of have an ego like that, so it strokes my ego to do that, and I'll admit that. Slightly embarrassed. But the one thing I think I'd say is that it's not necessary for everybody to be a spearhead and to be like, I'm going to plow through the wall like Kool-Aid Man and kick a bunch of ass. You don't have to do that, and you don't have to stand up in front of strangers and do that. You just have to be like around friends that you feel comfortable with and say and indicate in the way that you choose to discuss things that mental health isn't something that they have to be afraid of, that they have to be like, oh shit, if somebody finds out about this, da 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 da. And it doesn't mean you have to share like, this is exactly what I'm going through. This is your health, and you don't have to share it with anybody. That's why there's laws about that stuff, right? You are not obligated to do that. If you choose to, I think that's awesome. And anybody who's got a problem with it can suck it. But I think that there's a couple things. I mean, I make a joke about that, but until we get to the attitude that people who would give somebody shit for having depression can go suck it, then we're just going to keep allowing this to happen. The same way it's like, oh God, he got cancer. It wasn't because of some choice that they made, and God is striking them down. And mental health issues are not a character flaw. But we still kind of treat them like that. And by not speaking up for people and by not speaking out against it when we treat it like that, we implicitly back that up. So, yeah, you don't have to talk about all your crap, but just make a decision that you're not going to you're going to speak positively about it, and that's something that you don't have to be ashamed of. So, yeah.
All right, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Ed. Let's
thank
give Ed
you.
another round of applause.
Thank you. I appreciate it.